إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters in Islam. Welcome to Hadith discussion, in which we are going over a brief book review, summary, commentary on the book Al-Kashku fi Dhikr al-Hadith al-Ma'lul, Hidden Defects and Prophetic Narrations. And previously, we talked about some of the virtues of Ahlul Hadith. We mentioned what were some of the goals and aims of compiling this book. We also briefly talked about what were some of the doubts and misconceptions that people had back then and people still have today about the compilation of the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. Today, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, we're going to talk about the complexity of discovering hidden defects. What are some of the tools? What are some of the techniques? What are some of the sciences that the student of Hadith needs to master to be able to build the abilities and capabilities to recognize and discover hidden defects? Here we have noted some tips for the student of Hadith and student of knowledge that will aid him in building himself and hopefully nurturing his abilities to be able to discover and recognize hidden defects in some of the narrations. First and foremost is mastery of Mustalah al-Hadith. And it is upon the student to start off with the small books, the concise, the brief, short books of Mustalah al-Hadith. He should start off memorizing and reading Al-Bayquniyah, which is a small and short, brief book of Mustalah Hadith, which is actually arranged together in some lines of poetry. Then after that, they should move on to Nukhbat al-Fikr, which is also a small book of Mustalah Hadith. Then move on to Nuzhat al-Nazar, then Tadrib al-Rawi, then Al-Ba'ith al-Hathith. Then move on to the bigger books of Mustalah al-Hadith, and from the best of them is Fath al-Mughith, which is an explanation of Alfiyat al-Hadith. So this is like the concordance or the encyclopedia of all of the sciences of a hadith related to Mustalah Hadith. So it is upon the student to master Mustalah Hadith, start memorizing the books of Mustalah so that he can first and foremost build a basis of understanding the definitions of the scholars related to the different types of a hadith, the different grades and ranks and statuses of different narrators. And then when he slowly builds himself, memorizing one matan, two matans, three matans, four matans, right? He will broaden his knowledge step by step until he will come to discover that some of the scholars had some different conditions in regards to what hadith they consider to be sahih, which hadith they consider to be hasan, which mutaba'at and shawahid were considered to be acceptable or not acceptable. So the more that the student delves into the books of Mustalah Hadith, the more he will come to discover and know the differences of opinion amongst the scholars in regards to their different understandings and definitions of hadith terminologies. So we know, for example, Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, he had a condition that he put when he compiled his Sahih is a little bit different than what Ibn Hibban put in as his conditions when he compiled Sahih Ibn Hibban. So the more that the student of knowledge delves into the books of Mustalah, he will know also how different scholars practically apply their knowledge of Mustalah upon the narrations. For example, you might come across Imam at-Tirmidhi considered this hadith to be Hasan or Sahih, or he put certain conditions or certain statements and said that these hadith are considered to be authentic, or these hadith are considered to be Hasan. And then when you open up his Jami', you find that possibly Imam al-Tirmidhi, when it came to tatbiq of his mustalah, he may have made an exception on a few occasions. So having a definition and terminology about certain types of hadith is one thing, but then when it comes to practical implementation of those definitions, it may be another thing. So the student of hadith will come to learn this through his mastery of mustalah hadith and delving into the books of the sunan and seeing how the great ai did their tatbiqat, did their practical implementation of those mustalah. Another tip, an important reminder for the student of hadith and the student of knowledge is that gaining mastery or treading upon the path of mastery is not going to be easy, and it takes years and years of research. So much so where we find many of the scholars of the past, they would say that the science of hadith is two main branches: knowledge of hadith diraya and knowledge of hadith riwaya. Knowledge of hadith just related to the matun, just related to the text of the hadith, the explanation of them, discovering if they're shadh, discovering if they have a hidden defect in them, the wordings, the gharib, the alfaz, which are maybe strange or rare in the matan of the hadith. This is just one branch of knowledge of hadith, which you could spend an entire lifetime and not even master that knowledge of hadith. And then there's a whole nother branch of knowledge, riwayah, related to the rijal of the isnad, related to the narrators of the hadith, the chains of transmission, the tabaqat of the narrators, okay, jarh ta'dil, the sciences of criticism and praise. So even if you were to spend an entire lifetime just trying to memorize the biographies and learn who narrated from who and who was the stronger narrator, who was the stronger student, who was the stronger sheikh, what type of siyagh al-tahammal did he use, and siyagh al-ada, did he use ikhbar, did he use tahdith, did he use an'ana? All of these sciences just related to the chains of transmission in the narrators, that's a whole nother lifetime of studying the sciences of hadith. So it takes years of research, hands-on research, delving into the books of hadith, opening them up, reading the narrations, comparing the narrations, comparing the matun, to be able to tread upon the path, to be able to discover hidden defects in narrations. Also, another important science that the student of hadith, the student of knowledge, needs to learn to master is mastering of takhrij, being able to properly reference the hadith and the narrations back to their original sources, where they came from, finding the madar of the hadith. Where did the narration spread from? Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma heard it from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then 5 of the tabi'een heard it from Abdullah ibn Abbas. And then 15 of the atba' tabi'een heard it from those 5 tabi'een, and then it spread out amongst the Imam. Okay, Imam al-Bukhari narrated it in his Sahih. Imam Muslim narrated in his Sahih. It reached Imam Abu Dawood, and it reached the Tirmidhi through Imam al-Bukhari, for example. The only way we will come to find out about how the hadith spread is by first mastering takhrij and gathering the narrations and referencing them back to their original sources. So, for example, let's say that somebody finds a hadith in the 40 hadith of Imam an-Nawawi. Somebody's compiling a book of tafsir, for example, and the hadith that he's using in his book of tafsir is mentioned in the 40 hadith of Imam an-Nawawi. So when the student of knowledge goes to reference, he doesn't say Imam an-Nawawi narrated it or mentioned it in his book 40 hadith. No, the student of knowledge would always refer back to the oldest, the original source, where Imam Nawawi got it from. So he would refer it back to, for example, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ or إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ, that verily deeds are by intentions. Deeds depend upon intentions. This hadith was narrated by Imam al-Bukhari and Muslim. So even though it was the first hadith in the 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi's Arba'in, he wouldn't reference it back to Imam al-Nawawi. He would reference it back to where originally originated its first source, which would be Sahih al-Bukhari or Sahih Muslim. So this is very important when mastering takhrij and bringing back and referencing the hadith back to their original origins. Also, from the complexity of discovering hidden defects is having a knowledge and being well-grounded in the science of al-jarh wa ta'dil, of criticism of the narrators and also praises of the narrators. As I mentioned, the knowledge and sciences of hadith can be divided into two branches: knowledge related to the matun and knowledge related to the chains of narration. So jarh wa ta'dil is directly related to the narrators and the chains of transmission and the routes that the hadith are narrated from their shuyukh to their students to the compilers of hadith and till us today. So knowledge of hidden defects is different than jarh wa ta'dil. Even though jarh wa ta'dil is somewhat dependent upon having knowledge of jarh wa ta'dil, it is not. Sometimes the hidden defect can be in the matan, in the text, and not in the chain. Okay? So having knowledge of jarh wa ta'dil will assist one in discovering defects in the chain of narration, but it won't assist the student of knowledge in discovering the hidden defects in the matan. Whether the matan is shadh, is odd, if there are a whole bunch of trustworthy narrators in the chain of narration, but in another narration you have stronger narrators than those thiqat, and in the other narration you find that there is a different wording in the matan. Okay, for example, okay, so knowledge of hidden defects, it is also considered the most complex and advanced science from the sciences of Islam, and specifically the sciences related to hadith. And this is witnessed to not only by the Muslims, by the scholars, many different branches of scholars, hadith, tafsir, fiqh, aqidah, usul, all of them will say that the knowledge related to the asanid and preserving the asanid and jarh wa ta'dil and discovering ilal is one of the most complex and intricate sciences known on the face of this earth. Even the Orientalists and non-Muslims bear witness to it, that Muslims have a complex and intricate and masterful science within the sciences of hadith in preserving their prophetic traditions all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad up until today. We have those connected chains of narration. And also from the complexity of discovering hidden defects is that a narration being free from having hidden defects in the chain and the matan is actually a condition for the hadith to be considered authentic and acceptable and sahih. So these are just some of the complexities of discovering hidden defects within prophetic narrations. And we mentioned in one of our previous discussions about the virtues of Ahlul Hadith that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that there will be a saved sect, a victorious sect, an aided sect by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that no one will be able to harm them and no one will be able to humiliate them. And many of the scholars, from amongst them Imam Ahmad, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and many of the earlier scholars mentioned that they couldn't think of any other group except that it would be Ahl Hadith. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from amongst those scholars and those students of Ahlul Hadith. Ameen. So what are some virtues of this science, within the science of Hadith? So the science of Hadith, number one, is directly related to the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, directly related to the Sunnah, which was also a part of revelation. As we know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ, that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not speak from his self, does not speak from his own desires. Verily, it is revelation revealed. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given both. إِنِّي أُوتِيتُ الْقُرْآنَ وَمِثْلُهُ مَعَهُ, that indeed I was given the Quran and that similar to it in weight, in jurisprudence, in legislation. So just how we find a command or prohibition in the Quran and we understand it to be halal, haram, is similar how we would understand a command or prohibition in the Sunnah. There is no difference. So the sciences of Hadith, and specifically the sciences of ilal and discovering hidden defects, is one of the highest levels of Hadith sciences. And as we mentioned, a hadith cannot be considered sahih unless it is free of hidden defects. And one will not know if a hadith is free of hidden defects until they compile all of the narrations with similar wording and similar themes and similar topics. And he makes charts and categorizes them and categorizes the narrators. So being able to distinguish whether a hadith is authentic, acceptable, or weak, or fabricated or unacceptable can only be done and determined if one has knowledge of how to recognize and determine if a hadith is free or not from hidden defects. And knowing the acceptable from unacceptable narrations and narrators, distinguishing between stronger, and strongest narrations, and distinguishing between weakest narrations and fabricated narrations. The ability is only possible, and the capabilities are only possible with having knowledge of the techniques and principles of how to discover hidden defects in Islam. So here we're going to move on to talk a little bit about what is the meaning of an illah. What is an illah? What is an illah linguistically? What is it technically? What is the meaning of it in relation to what we are studying and discussing today? The word illah, it can be translated to mean a hidden defect, a blemish, a mistake, or a fault, or sickness. It also has many other linguistic meanings, such as repetition, or to repeat itself, or an obstacle in the path, or weakness in something, or to be distracted or taken away from doing something, or justification or reason for something. Right? The illah behind this, doing this, is that. So the scholars of hadith, they define an illah to be a hidden defect in the hadith that impairs it or causes weakness in it, even though it seems apparently authentic and acceptable to the naked eye. So, like we mentioned, the hadith when you look at the chain of narration and you look at the wording, sometimes you may find that all of the narrators are thiqat. All of the narrators are trustworthy, they're precise, and they're accurate in what they narrate. But there may be a hidden defect in that narration. It may be a hidden defect in the chain, that even though all of the narrators are thiqat, all of them are 100% trustworthy, and all of them are acceptable, and all of them are precise and accurate in what they narrate, it could be that possibly this narrator didn't directly hear it from this narrator. Maybe there was a wasita, maybe there was someone in between. Okay? Or maybe this matan, okay, it looks apparently authentic, but there may be a couple words which are off or not acceptable in that narration. So the conclusion of what in illah is, okay, for a hadith to be considered, okay, having a defect, right? We want to say now, we don't want to say a hadith considered to be authentic or inauthentic. We want to say, well, okay, we know that there is a hidden defect in this hadith. So there needs to be two conditions for it to be considered to have an illah. The first condition is that the defect has to be hidden or obscure. It can't be apparent to the naked eye. Okay, it has to be hidden or obscure. When you read the chain of narration and when you read the matan, you automatically think that it is sahih, it is authentic, it is hasan, it is acceptable. Okay, but when you go deeper and delve deeper into it, into the chain or the matan, and you compare the matun and you compare the chains, you find that there is a hidden defect in them. The second condition is that the defect negates its outward appearance of being sound and authentic. So these are the two conditions for a hadith to be considered having a defect. It has to have these two conditions. So that brings us to the next question. What types of defects or mistakes in the hadith would not be considered an illah? Would not be considered an illah. Okay? Some of the defects that are apparent when observing the chain and the text, such as a narrator being known as a kadhab, as a dajjal, right? As a sadiq, or a narrator being known as a liar, or being known for fisq. He has qadh fi adalatihi, right? He has something which people are known for open disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or he is known for ikhtilat, for his memory changing, or having a weak memory. Okay? And defects that do not impair the soundness of the narration. Okay? So, what types of defects or mistakes in the hadith will not be considered an illah? First, defects that are apparent, okay, when observing the chain or text, and defects that do not impair the soundness of the narration. So, bi'idhnillah, we will conclude this lecture today. Although we talked about what are some of the complexities of hidden defects and discovering hidden defects. What are the virtues of this science? Okay. What is an illah? Also, we talked about what are some of the conditions for a narration to be considered to have a hidden defect in it, and also what types of defects or blemishes or mistakes in the hadith would not be considered an illah. So until our next discussion, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.